"Play that song, and I'll marry you," she laughed. Until the janitor quietly sat at the piano. It was a cold Friday evening in December 1987, and the Hartwell Hotel in Cincinnati was dressed up nicer than usual. The ballroom had little white lights strung along the ceiling, round tables covered in red cloth, and a smell of pine and perfume that hung in the air like a kind memory. It was the annual Christmas party for the staff of a mid-sized law firm, and about 80 people had already crowded in, ties loosened, heels clicking on the marble floor, everyone a little louder than they would be on a normal workday. Near the buffet table, standing slightly apart from the main crowd, were 3 people who worked together and had grown used to surviving these parties the same way they survived long Mondays, by making each other laugh. Maggie was 28 years old, a legal secretary with short copper-red hair and the kind of sharp, dry humor that made even her boss nervous sometimes. She had a glass of white wine in her hand and an expression on her face that said she was judging everyone in the room but doing it fondly. Standing next to her was Carol, her closest friend from the office, a warm woman in her early 30s, with a talent for noticing things. On the other side was Dennis, the firm's file clerk, who took great pride in his opinions about everything. Dennis had been going on for several minutes about how real romance no longer existed. Not in real life, not anymore. It was all dating apps and half-hearted gestures, and people too afraid to say what they actually meant. Carol disagreed. She said romance was still out there, people were just afraid of looking foolish. Maggie listened to both of them, and then looked across the room at the old upright piano sitting against the far wall. It was a handsome thing, dark wood, polished but untouched. It had been sitting there all evening like furniture, something to look at but not really use. The DJ was playing quiet background music through a speaker system nearby. She turned back to her friends with a half smile and said, almost as if she was thinking out loud, "You know what? If someone walked over to that piano right now and played Can't Help Falling in Love, I would marry them. Right here. Right now. I mean it." Carol laughed. Dennis laughed. Maggie laughed too, because of course she was joking. It was the kind of thing you say on a Friday night, with wine in your hand and holiday lights overhead, a throwaway comment, the kind that floats up into the air and disappears. She refilled her glass. The conversation moved on. The DJ came back on. Someone from accounting started doing a dance move that definitely should have stayed private. About 10 minutes later, Carol went quiet mid-sentence. Maggie noticed. What? Carol didn't answer. She just tilted her head slightly toward the far end of the ballroom. Maggie turned around. A man was sitting down at the piano. He wasn't one of the lawyers or the paralegals, or anyone she recognized from the office. He was wearing dark work trousers and a plain collared shirt. His hands were large and looked like they had done real physical work for a long time. He had a quiet, steady face, the kind of face that doesn't ask for attention. He was, though she didn't know it yet, the hotel's head of facilities. His name was Eugene, and he was 34 years old, and he had been mopping the service corridor just outside the ballroom when he heard what she said. He had stopped walking when he heard it. He had stood there for a moment, holding his mop, thinking. And then, without really deciding, he had leaned the mop against the wall, walked into the ballroom through the side door, sat down at the piano, and placed his hands on the keys. The first notes of Can't Help Falling in Love came out of that piano and moved across the ballroom like something slowly waking up. It was not the version you hear in an elevator or at a shopping center. It was full and slow and deeply felt, each note landing with patience, like someone who had known this song since before he could explain what music was. He played from memory, his eyes cast slightly down, his shoulders relaxed. He was not performing, he was just playing. The room did not go silent all at once. It happened the way rooms go quiet when something real enters them, gradually, person by person, conversation by conversation, until the only sound left was the piano. Maggie stood absolutely still near the punch bowl. Carol, who would later describe this moment to anyone who would listen for the next 30 years, said that Maggie's face went through 5 completely different expressions in the space of about 8 seconds. First confusion, then recognition, then something close to disbelief, then a kind of wonder she had never seen on Maggie's face before, and then something else, softer, quieter, that Carol always struggled to put a name to. The song lasted just under 4 minutes. Nobody in that ballroom spoke during it. Not the drunk guy near the bar. Not the boss's wife. Not the catering staff standing near the kitchen door. Everyone just listened. When the last note faded, Eugene lifted his hands from the keys slowly, like he was setting something delicate down. He stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked back toward the corner of the room where he had left his mop bucket. He did not look toward Maggie. He did not smile at the crowd or wait for applause. He simply played the song and then went back to his work, the same way he always did. Dennis turned to Maggie and opened his mouth to say something, but Maggie had already set down her glass. She crossed the ballroom. Carol watched her go, not breathing. Dennis forgot what he was about to say. Maggie caught up with Eugene just before he reached the service hallway door. She tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, and for a second, they just looked at each other, a woman in a party dress and a man holding a mop handle, in a hotel ballroom in December, with Christmas music starting back up behind them. She introduced herself. She asked him how long he had been playing piano. He told her since he was 7. His grandmother had taught him on an old upright in her house in rural Kentucky. He said the piano at the hotel had been sitting there untuned for months, and he had quietly gotten it tuned himself a few weeks earlier, on his own time, because it bothered him to hear a good instrument sound bad. She asked him if he had heard what she said. He said yes. She asked why he sat down. He thought about it for a moment, genuinely thought about it, she noticed, rather than giving the first answer that came to mind. Then he said, quietly, because it seemed like somebody needed to. They talked in that service hallway for 40 minutes. Carol covered for Maggie with their boss. Dennis stood at the buffet table, no longer sure he believed what he had been saying about romance. Eugene wrote his phone number on a paper napkin. His handwriting was careful and even. He folded it once and handed it to her. She called him the next morning, a Saturday. Earlier than she meant to, earlier than she had told herself she would, before she could think about it too much and talk herself out of it. He picked up on the second ring. Their courtship was nothing like the movies. There was no grand moment where everything clicked into place. It was slow and honest and full of small things. He was a patient man who read books he found at yard sales, and remembered birthdays, and noticed when a room's mood had shifted before anyone said a word. She was quick and funny, and sometimes said the exact right thing, and sometimes said completely the wrong thing, with total confidence. Their friends, his friends and hers, who met each other gradually over the following months, all said some version of the same thing. These two people made sense together, even though on paper they probably shouldn't. Eugene went back to school at 36 to study building systems engineering. Maggie defended the decision to everyone who raised an eyebrow, including her own mother. She believed in him in the specific, practical, daily way that actually means something. 14 months after the Christmas party, on a Saturday evening in February, he came to her apartment for dinner. She had cooked, which was something she rarely did without complaint. After they ate, Eugene got up from the table and walked to the corner of the living room where a small upright piano sat. Maggie had bought it 3 months into their relationship from a second-hand shop. She told everyone it was just something she picked up on a whim. She didn't know how to play a single note on it. She had never tried to learn, but she kept it there in the corner, cleaned it regularly, and had it tuned twice a year. Eugene sat down. He placed his hands on the keys. He played the opening notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Then he stopped. He turned on the bench and looked at her. He held out a small ring, simple gold, a modest stone, nothing that would make a magazine cover, but his hands were steady and his eyes were clear, and there was nothing uncertain about the moment. She said yes before he had finished the question. They were married for 31 years. They raised 2 children in a house with a piano in the living room that was always slightly too big for the space but never moved. Eugene played it on Sunday mornings and sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep. Maggie never learned a single chord, but she could tell you every song he knew by heart. He passed away quietly in the winter of 2021. At his memorial service, Carol stood up in front of about 200 people and told the story of the Christmas party. She described the moment Maggie set down her glass and crossed that ballroom as the bravest thing she had ever seen another person do. After the service, someone asked Maggie whether she had really meant it when she said it, the throwaway line, the joke about marrying whoever played that song. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means a person is actually thinking, and not just gathering words. Then she said, "I think part of me meant it. I think sometimes we say things out loud that we're a little afraid to mean, and we say them hoping that someone out there is brave enough and kind enough to take them seriously." She looked down at her hands. "He was," she said. "He always was." The piano is still in her living room, a little older now, the finish slightly worn near the treble keys from years of use. She had it tuned again last spring. Her daughter asked her why she still keeps it, since no one in the house plays it anymore. Maggie didn't answer right away. She walked over to it and touched the top of it lightly, the way you touch something you are not ready to explain to anyone, including yourself. "Because some things deserve to stay," she finally said. People who hear this story for the first time usually react in one of two ways. Some say it sounds too perfect, too cinematic, too much like something written rather than lived. And maybe that's fair. Real life doesn't usually arrange itself into such clean, beautiful moments. But then again, maybe it does. Sometimes. Maybe the difference is just whether anyone is paying attention. Eugene was paying attention that night. He heard something, a joke, a wish, a small brave truth dressed up as a throwaway comment. And instead of walking past it like most people would have, he stopped. He thought. And then he did the quiet, generous, slightly ridiculous thing that changed both their lives. He didn't do it to be a hero. He didn't do it expecting anything in return. He did it, he once said in a conversation years later, because the song was one of the most beautiful ever written, and the piano had been sitting there all night with nobody playing it, and that seemed like a genuine waste. That was Eugene. Always practical, even about love. There is something worth sitting with in this story, something beyond the romance of it. It is the reminder that the most important moments in a person's life very rarely look important when they are actually happening. They look like a Friday night. They look like a glass of wine, and a throwaway comment, and a man with a mop bucket who pauses for just a second longer than most people would. They look like nothing. And then, slowly, over years and decades and a whole shared life, they become everything.